If you found out the major tourist destination where you were considering taking your summer vacation had 18 bombings a month, would you want to know about it? Don't trust the media to tell you, but I will, right here on The Hot Zone.
This is The Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
All right, so when we talk about hot zones, you don't usually think of countries that get several feet of snow every year, right? And if you had to guess which European countries were the safest, you'd probably tend to think of the Scandinavian countries like Norway and Denmark and Sweden. But there's a curious phenomenon taking place in Sweden over the past few years, which has resulted in more than a few deaths and dozens of injuries. But the media and for sure the Swedish government don't want you to know about it. So here's what you need to do. I'm going to put this as plainly as I can. Right now, Sweden has more bombings per month than Somalia. You heard that right. There's been a growing epidemic of bombings happening in Sweden over the last few years. And this year, by May, there had been 93 separate attacks. That works out to over 18 per month. In 2018, there were more than 12 per month, so the numbers keep growing. Somalia, by comparison, from what I can tell, has about 10 per month. Now, pardon my pun, but that's pretty inflammatory stuff. And to be fair, when the bombings happen in Somalia, they tend to be much bigger and more deadly. But in sheer numbers, there's clearly a big problem happening in Sweden right now. And it's been building for a long, long time. Now, the Swedish government is very, very interested in making sure the news of these bombings gets buried as deep and as quickly as possible. Why? Well, there are several reasons. Let's start to delve into them a little bit. Now, first, Sweden is a quasi-socialist country. While the state doesn't own the means of production, which is the very definition of socialism, the taxes that they charge their citizens are so high that they essentially own the citizens themselves, which some would argue are the true means of production of any society. Do you think I'm exaggerating? If you make only $50,000 a year in Sweden, you pay about 50% of your income to the government in income taxes alone. Then you pay a 25% value-added tax on anything you buy, with some exceptions like food. A new car in Sweden can easily cost $100,000 with all taxes and fees included. So if you have to give every penny you make to the government from January until, say, October every year before you get to keep anything, well, let me just ask, what does that make you? To me, it makes you a slave. Now, sure, Sweden has great healthcare, great roads, and universal welfare system that's one of the most generous in Europe. They can afford to do that when they charge people the kind of taxes they do. At least you can afford it until a few million migrants come knocking on your door. Foreign-born migrants now make up about 20% of the population of Sweden. And this number has climbed precipitously for the past few years. The majority of these migrants who've come in lately are from Syria and Afghanistan and African countries like Somalia, Eritrea, Sudan, Cameroon, Uganda, you name it. And there are more coming in all the time. Now, I went to Sweden a couple years ago to report on this phenomenon and the effects it's having on that country. And what I found was kind of startling. You may have heard the recent controversy surrounding immigrant troubles in Sweden. Some majority immigrant areas where police are as likely as not to be attacked if they enter have earned the name NoGo Zones. The Stockholm suburb of Rinkeby is one such neighborhood. 90% of the people living here are either migrants or children of migrants. Many come from lawless countries like Somalia and Syria, and some locals call the area Little Mogadishu. I've been to Mogadishu, and I can promise you after visiting Rinkeby, this is nothing like that. But that's not to say it isn't dangerous for people who are unwelcome here, namely the police and journalists. In 2016, several film crews reporting here were attacked.
And attacked.
And a police arrest a few weeks ago led to riots like this. I went in low profile, filming only with my smartphone. It earned me some unfriendly stares and a few questions, but I wasn't attacked. Residents I spoke with said they much prefer this place to the countries they escaped from, but nobody would agree to be filmed. One thing I did notice was there were very few young women. That got me wondering how the young men here ever hope to date or get married. Reports from Sweden say there's been a spike in sexual assaults recently, but it's hard to say if this is migrant-related because Sweden stopped recording the nationality of people accused of crimes in 2001. And this leads to an even bigger question. Why? Now, before I move on, I want to reiterate, while there may be actual terrorists joining this flow of migrants, the vast, overwhelming majority of them are not terrorists. They just simply want a better life. And you can't blame them for that. But I made what I think is an important distinction in an interview I did shortly after my trip to Sweden, that just because they want a better life doesn't mean they know how to live in a civilized country.
So, Chuck, the question is why? Is it political correctness? Are they trying to hide something? Why wouldn't you record the nationalities of these criminals, especially when you're dealing with this influx of so-called refugees coming into Sweden?
Well, I tell you what I found, Grant, is that this place, the country of Sweden is sort of the poster child for political correctness. And, you can't even, I was really surprised. You can't even say anything negative about any immigrant group, any nationality, anything. They say that they have no censorship laws, but what I found is a tremendous amount of self-censorship when it comes to this problem. Now, let me just give you an example of that. Just last week, there was a Swedish policeman, who went on Facebook and kind of posted a rant about migrant crime in his country. And I'll just read to you a little bit of what he wrote on Facebook. He said, "Here we go. This is what I've handled from Monday through Friday of this week. Rape, robbery, aggravated assault, rape, extortion, blackmail, assault, etc., etc. Suspected perpetrators, Ali Muhammad, Mahmoud, Muhammad Ali, again, and then he says, countries represented in the crimes this week: Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia. So he is now being investigated for hate speech. Now, what does it say about a country when you can go online and quote actual statistics of what happened? He wasn't even giving his opinion about it. He was just saying what happened, and he can be charged with hate speech. It's not that they are legally, it's more that they're afraid to talk about it, I guess. And that's the interesting thing. The people I talked to really seemed to be self-censoring. I talked to several young women, young Swedish women, and asked them, are you concerned about the rise in sexual assaults in your country and that sort of thing? And they all said, no, I'm not, but I know people who are. And I just thought it was strange that I kept hearing that same refrain over and over again. I'm not, but I know people who are. And it was almost as if that was an attempt for them to distance themselves from saying anything negative about anybody in their country. Sure. Now, they are very nice people, but still, you ought to be able to speak your mind, don't you think?
Absolutely. And so you mentioned in your piece these no-go zones. We've heard about them existing in Paris. How bad was it? Did you actually, could you confirm that they existed there in Sweden where the cops just are staying away?
Grant, honestly, I think that calling it a no-go zone is sensationalizing the issue, because I had no problem driving in there, walking around, talking to people. But what we did find is that there were large groups of military-age males, young men from places like Somalia and Syria. Now, you have to understand these people come from failed states. They come from a place where there is no government. And you can't expect them to come in to a country like Sweden and suddenly understand what it means to be a law-abiding citizen. They didn't have any laws to abide by before. And so what happens is, if you make those people angry, they immediately resort to violence. And that's what we've seen over and over again. Just 2 weeks ago, they burned 7 cars in the parking lot of that place where I was reporting from yesterday.
So you raise an interesting psychological perspective here, because just because you come from a country with no rule of law, shouldn't the moral character of somebody realize that murder and rape is wrong, whether there are laws for that or not? And so coming into a society that does have a rule of law, you think they'd find relief instead of just trying to take advantage of that as well. And I think we're seeing more of the let's try to take advantage of it than we are these people coming for relief.
They certainly are relieved to be there, and the people I talked to were very happy that they were there, except for one guy that said it's too cold. I want to go back to Somalia. But aside from that, I don't think they're taking advantage of it to be lawless. I really got the sense that they don't understand the concept of being lawful to begin with, because they come from a place where it's law of the jungle. I've been to Mogadishu, and I can tell you that is one of the most dangerous places on the planet. And if somebody there doesn't like you, they will come kill you, and they won't think twice about it. And they'll rip your arms off if they have over the price of a banana or something. And so when they see somebody filming them, for example, matter of fact, I saw this in Paris as well. There was an African immigrant that I was filming, and he said, and we were at the Louvre. Okay, so I'm taking video of the Louvre. This guy's standing there, and he points at me and says, "You don't filming, no filming, no filming." And he comes over and he starts poking me with a selfie stick he was trying to sell to people. And I said, "Listen, buddy, if you don't want to get your picture taken, don't come to one of the most photographed places on the planet." Yeah, he didn't get that, and immediately, rather than just saying, "Hey, I prefer not to be filmed," he just went right to violence.
So last week in Stockholm, there were 3 attacks over a single 24-hour period. And a week earlier in that same city, a massive blast blew out all the windows of an apartment building, and for miles around was heard. Shootings have surged as well, but the news hardly even reports on those anymore. Now, mind you, this is a country with some of the most stringent gun control laws in the entire world. It kind of goes without saying that grenades and bombs are illegal too. What's worse, even defending yourself from an attack in Sweden can get you arrested. So your inherent right to self-defense is highly restricted. Now, if you ask me, that's the most shameful part. The Swedish government wants so badly to keep these attacks from becoming a stain on their nice, clean, polite image that they've published a website which addresses stories linking immigration to crime and calls them, quote, simplistic and occasionally inaccurate. On that page, the Swedish government tries to insinuate that there's only been one terror attack in their country perpetrated by an Islamic terrorist. That one that they're claiming was in 2010. They try to explain away the terror attack that happened in 2017 when an Uzbeki immigrant killed 5 people, including an 11-year-old girl, and injured about 14 others by driving a truck wired up as a car bomb down a crowded pedestrian street. Fortunately for the hundreds of people in the area, the bomb didn't go off. But the perpetrator was Rakhmat Akilov, an asylum seeker who claimed allegiance to ISIS. Strangely, though, the Swedish government doesn't consider that a terror attack because it wasn't officially claimed by the terror organization. Now, it'd be wrong to paint all these migrants with a broad brush and say they're all terrorists. That's not true. It's nothing of the sort. Very few of them will ever even consider becoming terrorists. What these people are is opportunist, if anything. And you can't blame them for that. It's just like we're seeing in the Western Hemisphere. There's an infrastructure that's been created by well-meaning organizations that makes it possible for people from all over the developing world to travel thousands of miles from their homeland and enter illegally into a country with a generous social welfare system. But when they get there, the problem is they just can't help bringing along the baggage of having grown up in a lawless and failed state. In places like that, the law of the land is the law of the jungle. And kill or be killed, eat or be eaten, take or be taken from. And they just don't know any different. Many of them also bring a deep-rooted faith tradition, one that will undoubtedly go much further in shaping the way that they see that new world and their attitudes toward it than the secular humanism, which is essentially a belief in nothing that so pervades the West and Western countries. A melting pot with those ingredients very soon becomes a toxic and explosive brew. And before long, you get what's happening in Sweden. Now listen, there are hurting, hungry people all over the world, and we need to help them. It's our duty. But we can't help the rest of the world if we do so in a way that destroys the very systems that give us what we need to be generous. And most of all, this goes to show that if we want to give these people, all people, a better life, a better way of life, we have to first get them into a better way of thinking. They need to know God's law, the law of love. It's the only law that overcomes the law of the jungle. And that would apply to every person on the planet. So that's all my sermon for today, folks. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll go and check out patreon.com/hotzone and subscribe for lots of free content, free copies of my books, and a whole lot more. So we'll be back again tomorrow. I'm Chuck Holton. You've been watching The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.